How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying some daf of Masechta Sotah. Which daf? Daf Mem Gimel. Daf Mem Gimel. That's a good daf, Mem Gimel. Friends, I'm telling you, on yesterday's daf, Mem Beis, Tosfos ends for Masechta Sotah. Let me tell you, the rest of Masechta Sotah, these pages are humongo. It's exhausting. It's only 7 pages, but woo! These are big flipping pages, man. And these, they could be a shtickle exhausting. But today's daf isn't so crazy. All right, friends, we're going to start at a Mishnah. We're going weiter on the. We're going weiter with the. Gotta make sure that this microphone doesn't go crazy. I'm a shtickle nervous. Okay, hopefully it was just a one-time thing. All right, I'll go upon him. Okay, so we're going to go weiter with. What are we going to go weiter with? With the people who go back from the war. So we're going to start the Mishnah. Amem Gimel Amud Aleph, about 15-20 lines in. V'dibra hashotrim elo and the officers speak to the nation, Lamer, saying, Mi'aish asher bona bayis chodosh v'lo chanochoi. Who is the fellow who built a new house and hasn't yet, moved in, I guess? Then a Chanukah sabayis? I don't know. What's chanocho? He built a new house. I guess he hasn't moved in yet and lived there for a year, let's say. So go home. Whether you build a place to keep your straw, beis haboker, or to keep your cows, beis ha'etzim, to keep your wood, beis ha'otzaros, to keep, I think, wine and oil and things. Now, this is whether you build this house yourself, or if you purchase it, or if you inherit it, or if you received it as a gift. All of these are qualify for returning from the war. Who planted a vineyard and has not yet, so chililo in this case is referring to neter ravai. Neter ravai is, right, so of course the first 3 years is orla, the 4th year is neter ravai. You transfer the value onto money and bring the money to Yerushalayim. Or I imagine you could just bring the fruits to Yerushalayim either, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be neter ravai. So if you planted a vineyard but you have not yet been mechalel the vineyard, whether you plant the vineyard or whether it's a vineyard or whether it's just 5 fruit trees, even if there are 5 different types of fruit trees, it all qualifies for going home from the war. Whether you plant these trees, whether you do a sort of grafting where you bend over one branch back into the ground or something like that, and then I guess let it take root or something. Or if you make a notch in an existing tree and stick a branch from a different tree into that tree. I don't really know how grafting works. Anybody know how grafting works? Probably YouTube it. Then you got to watch ads though. Friends, what's your opinion on YouTube ads? I know I can get an ad blocker. I don't know why I haven't gotten an ad blocker. I don't know. Anyways, I just don't. Instead, I just make a blacklist. Anybody who advertises on YouTube, I will not reward them by purchasing whatever they have to sell. It's why would I reward you for bothering me? I just want to watch a video about grafting, and now you're preventing me from doing that. I don't want to reward you right now. Anyways, I don't have a blacklist that I've actually written down things, but I know in my mind who's bothered me. I get braggas like that, you know what I mean? Oh yeah, I know right now. I got plenty of names come to mind right now. There are stores I don't go to because they advertise on YouTube. I'm not going to reward you for bothering me. Let's go weiter. And lemaisa, to pay for YouTube, that's also the same thing. I don't want to pay for something that I'm annoyed into paying for. Right? I want to pay for, I'd be happy to pay for YouTube. Well, I'm happy to pay for Spotify. YouTube just feels like it's not the kind of thing that I want to pay for. It feels like I'd rather not use it than pay for it. And if you're going to annoy me into paying for it, that's not going to work. Friends, you don't need to hear these deliberations of my mind. Let's go weiter. I just feel like annoying somebody into buying something is not the best way to convince somebody to buy something. At least not me. I'm sure it works with plenty of people. Okay. So whether you plant, whether you like mavrich it, whether you markiv it, different kinds of like grafting. Now this is whether, or even if you purchase it, or if you inherit it, or if you got it as a gift, right? A vineyard. Fine. If you have a fellow who betrothed a woman, he got engaged. Whether he betrothed a besula who has never been married before, whether he gets engaged to somebody who has been married before, but it doesn't matter, right? They're engaged. Even if she's a shomeres yavam, which we know all about. We learned Yivamas for like a long time. So whether like she needs to do Yibum with her late husband's brother, right? And she's basically like, they haven't yet done Yibum, so they're just kind of like, it's like they're engaged, Kilo, in a sense. And even if he hears that his brother died in battle, Choser Uvalo, he can go back home because now he's got to do Yibum with his sister-in-law. Kol elu ve'elu shomin divrei kohen marche amulchama v'chozin. So now all of these examples, right? I'll just take the last example. For example, somebody who's engaged. So the interesting thing about this case is that shomin kohen divrei kohen marche amulchama v'chozin, meaning they can't just stay home and say, well, I'm going to be dismissed anyways. No, in these examples, we're going to see other examples where you can stay home. But here they have to go. We said that this happens in the Svar, in the sort of last villages before they enter into enemy territory. So they have to go there and then get dismissed when they hear this, and then they go back. They help out. They provide water. They provide food. They fix up the roads. Right? They don't just go home. They don't have to fight, but they have to contribute in other ways. Now these are examples that you do not go back. That you have to go fight. Somebody who builds a gatehouse, a portico, or a gallery. Okay. If he only planted 4 fruit trees, or even if there were 5 trees but they're not fruit producing, or if he's getting married, or even if he gets married but remarries somebody who he was divorced from, he remarried his wife. Or if a widow marries a high priest, or a divorcee or a chalutzi marries a regular priest, right? These are relationships that are not allowed to happen. Right? If you have a union between a Yisrael and a mamzer nosin / mamzeres nesina, these are relationships that are not allowed, and therefore, if you're getting married in these situations, so then you do not go back. Lo hayechozer, he would not go back. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, afabone bais al mechono lo hayechozer, right? If you knock down your house, or maybe your house fell down, and then you mamish rebuild the same exact house, so then it's not considered a new house that you would return home for. Rabbi Eliezer Omer afabone beis levenim bisharon lo hayechozer. Also, if you build a brick house in the Sharon, you would not go back, because apparently there, I don't know, I guess the ground was like soft or whatever, and basically every few years you'd have to rebuild the house. So it's not like considered like a new house that you'd go back for. It's just like, it's just part of living there is you got to rebuild your house all the time, I guess, if you make it from bricks. Now in the following examples, they don't have to leave their house. They don't have to provide water and food and fix roads and help and out contribute that way. These people can just stay put. If he built a house and he moved in, but I think the point is he hasn't been there. I think in all these examples he hasn't been there for a year yet, right? So he built a house and he has moved in, and now he can enjoy it. if he planted a vineyard and he finally, it was 3 years of Orla and then Neteravai, and now finally he can enjoy his vineyard, Hanose Esarusaso, or if he not just gets engaged but gets married, Hakonis Esivimto, or if he does Yibum, Shenemar Nokuye Leveso Shana Achas, so it says that he can stay home for 1 full year. Leveso Zebeso, so that Lebeso, that refers to when he has a new house and he's moved in. Yiye Zekarmo, Yiye includes his vineyard. Vesimachas Ishto, Zo Ishto, that refers to when he gets married. Ashelokach Lavias Yivimto, Ashelokach even includes Yivama. Ein Maspikin Maim Umazon, Ve'ein Mesaknis Adrachim. They don't need to leave their house at all. They don't need to provide food and water or fix up roads. Just stay home in your new house, vineyard, wife, just stay home. Taner Rabbanan, says the Gemara, V'dibra Ashotrim. Oh, so the pasuk says that the officers speak. Yachol Dvarim Shel Atzman. Is it possible that they speak sort of their lines, that they're just kind of speaking their things that they are meant to speak? Let's go Vaitik Shu Omer V'yosfu Ashotrim. When the pasuk says that the officers add on Harid Dvarim Shel Atzman, that's their lines. Those are their lines that they're saying. Amor. Homani Mekayim V'dibru Ashotrim. So what does it mean that they spoke? What are they speaking? B'divrei Meshuach Milchama HaKosu Medaber. They would speak for the Kohen Meshuach Milchama, the priest. HaKetzad, tell me, how does this work? Kohen Medaber V'shoter Mashmiah. So basically the Kohen would speak this stuff, and as we've learned in the past and recently, that just like right, there was this concept of like the human microphone kind of concept, right? So the Kohen Mishach Muhammad would say it, but he wouldn't yell, he wouldn't scream. There were obviously no microphones, so the shotrim would then, the officers would then make sure that the people heard it, and they would be say it louder, I guess. Tani Chada, we have one brayso that says Kohen Medaber v'shoter mashmiya, that the Kohen speaks and the shoter makes sure that it's heard. V'tanidach Kohen Medaber v'Kohen mashmiya. We have another brayso that says that it's the priest who's speaking and it's the priest who's making sure that the people hear. V'tanidach shoter Medaber v'shoter mashmiya. And another brayso says that it is the officer who's speaking and the officer who makes sure the people hear. Amar Abaye, Oketzad, says Abaye, no, tell me more. This is how it goes. Mi v'nigash ad v'dibru Kohen Medaber v'Kohen mashmiya. So from the word v'nigash until the word v'dibru, so that was the Kohen was responsible for all aspects. He would say it, he would make sure that the people hear it. Mi v'dibru ad v'yosfu Kohen Medaber v'shoter mashmiya. So the Kohen would speak it, and then the officer would make sure that the people hear it. V'yosfu va'elach, and then from where it says v'yosfu ashotrim, that the officers would add on, well, that's shoter medaber v'shoter mashmiya. That was entirely the officer being responsible for speaking it and making sure that it was heard. Who is the fellow who has built a new home? Taner Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Asher Bono, Eini Ela Asher Bono. So when it says, right, who's the fellow who built a house? All I know is somebody who builds a house. Lokach v'yorash v'niton lo matono minayin. How do I know that what if he purchased the house or inherited the house or if it was given to him as a gift? Minayin. How do I know that he goes home from war as well? Tam lomer mi ish asher bono. That apparently it could have just said mi asher bono. So what's ish? So from the extra word ish, it includes all these other ways that it falls into his possession. Bayis, when it says a house, ein li elo bayis. So all I know is a house. Minayin rabos beis hateven. How do I know that it includes even a place where you store grain, uveis haboker, and where you store oxen, uveis ha'etzim, and where you store trees, wood, uveis ha'utzaris, and where you storage house for oil and wine. Tamaloma asher bono mikol makom, right? I mean, he could have said asher bayis bono, that it's davka house, but it doesn't say. It says asher bono, right? So any kind of building would be included, like these storage facilities. Is it possible then that I can include even if he builds a gatehouse, a portico, or a gallery? Tamulomar bias. Well, it says Ashabana bias, so it's excluding something. Ma bias roy ledira, av kol roy ledira. Just like a house is fit for living in, so we're specifically talking about places that are fit for living in, which exclude a gatehouse, a portico, and a gallery, that you don't live in these spaces. But I guess that these storage houses, where I guess technically you can live in them, I guess that's the point. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer bayis k'mashmo. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is a Pashtin, and he says no, it says house, only a house, none of these storage facilities. Now, continues the Bais, lo chonach v'lo chanocho. Could have said, right, Misha bara Bais v'lo chonach. What's v'lo chanocho? It seems limiting. It, prat legazlan, to the exclusion of somebody who stole a house. So the pasuk comes to exclude somebody who stole a house. Lema d'lo Rabbi Yossi ha Galili. Let's say that this is not like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because the Rabbi Yossi Aglili or Amar v'achalevav zeh misyare. Because Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion is that when the pasuk says mi ayoriv v'achalevav, that who's scared and has a soft heart, so that's somebody who's nervous about sins that he's done. So if Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that mi ayoriv v'achalevav is including people who have sinned, so memele, if you stole something, you would go home because of so you'd be going home for that. So, but over here we are saying that if you stole a house, you would not go home. But if he's a Gazlan, he should be going home because of Miya Yorv Rachaleva. So the Gemara says, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So you can even say that it's like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and still he would not go home for being a sinner, could go into Avad Tshuva, because he's repented. So that's why he goes to the battle. He's repented, he's not a sinner. V'yoav Dmein, he's already paid for the house. But if that's the case, right, meaning he stole it, but then he paid for it already. But then if he paid for it, he's a purchaser for the Hadar, and he should go back for having purchased the house. But no, since initially he took possession of it through theft, so he's not considered a purchaser. He's considered a thief, but he's not considered a thief because he's repented, so therefore he's not going to go home for being a sinner, and he's also not going to go home for having purchased the house. He's going to go and fight. Says the Gemara. So Cheve, here we get into shtickle kilayim stuff. It's not too hard, but you gotta go a little bit slowly, but not too bad. So who's the fellow who planted a vineyard? That when it says he who planted, all I know is if he planted. How do I know that even if he purchased the vineyard, or if he inherited it, or if it was given to him as a gift? That who is the fellow who planted? It could have just said mi ashenoto. Why does it say fellow? So the fellow bit includes all these other methods of acquiring. Karim, when it says vineyard, in the other karim, all I know is a vineyard. How do I know that even if it's not a vineyard, but it's 5 fruit trees, even if each one is different species, still different type of fruit tree, still he would go home for them. Tamul Asher Noto. Therefore it says, where am I? Asher Noto. That he planted. Right, it doesn't say Asher Kerem Noto, right? It says Asher Noto Kerem. So Asher Noto comes to include all of these other things. Is it possible then I'll even include if you only planted 4 fruit trees, not 5? Or if you planted 5, but they weren't fruit trees, they were just regular trees. Tamlomar Kerem. That's why it says Kerem. No, it has to be a fruit tree. It has to at least be a fruit tree, but it can be, different kinds of fruit trees. That's also fine. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Kerem K'mashmo, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. No, when it says vineyard, it means vineyard, and that is that. Lo chila v'lo chililo. So when the pasuk says, it could have said lo chilel. It says lo chililo. It. Right? He didn't do Neter Revai, was Mechal it. Right, the 4th year, bringing it to Yerushalayim. It chalalo. It. What's it excluding? Prad l'mavrich v'lamarkiv. To the exclusion or if he does ma'avir chumarkiv, I think that's like bending over a branch into the ground to let it like take root, or to like make a notch in a base tree and then to stick in a branch from another tree. That's markiv. So if he does ma'avir umarkiv, so then he would not go home for that. But 1 second, our Mishnah had said fakert. Our Mishnah had said that it's whether you plant or whether you are mavrich or whether you're markiv, you would go home. So I don't understand. Our Mishnah is saying that mavrich and markiv you would go home for, but this brisa is saying that mavrich and markiv you would not go home for. So Amr Reb Zera, Amr Reb Chizda lo kasha, kan bar kovas iser, kan bar kovas heter. So Reb Zera says name of Chizda, well, it depends. If it's hakovas iser, if it's a grafting of a forbidden type, so then if it's a forbidden grafting, so then of course you would not go back for that. If it's a permitted grafting, so then you would go back for that, like our Mishnah says. Hakovas heter echidami. Well, what's a permitted form of grafting? Ilema yalda b'yalda. If you're going to tell me, well, it's so both trees are less than 3 years old, right? You haven't been mechal them yet, right? So you have the base tree is a young tree, and also the branch that you're sticking into it is also young. But if that's the case, tepuk lei, this has nothing to do with grafting. You should already be able to go home because clearly the base tree is yours. The base tree is less than, right? You haven't been mechal it yet, so you're already going home. Who cares about the grafting? So ella yalda bizkena. Okay, so maybe it's talking about where the base tree is more than 3 years. Right? You've already been mechal it, or right, whatever. It's old enough that you would not go home for it, and then you're taking a young tree and sticking it into the base tree, which is old. But 1 second, Babo says if you take a young branch and stick it into an old tree, Batla Yalda Bizkena, the young branch becomes bottle to the old tree, the Ein Ba Din Orla, and the young branch does not have a din of Orla, even though it's less than 3 years old. Since the base tree is more than 3 years old, it's no longer Orla. So we see that the branch that is being stuck into the old tree, to the base tree, the branch is bottled to the base tree. And if the base tree is old, so then you wouldn't go home for this grafting, because the branch would be bottled to the old tree. So Amr Reb Yirmiyah la'olam yalda b'yalda. So it says Reb Yirmiyah, look, we're really talking about where the branch and the base tree you have not yet been mechal. Now, okay. So if that's the case, then wouldn't you already be going home because of the base tree, which is young and you haven't yet been mechal it? So uchigon dinat alach kamaisa lisag v'lekoris. Well, we're talking about where the base tree, which is not yet 3 years old, was planted not for the intention of eating. You planted this base fruit tree to be part of a fence, or to be for lumber, which I'm not really sure why you'd be allowed to plant a fruit tree for lumber. Maybe if you initially plant it for lumber, it's okay, right? Because normally you're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree, I think. But maybe if you intentionally planted it for lumber, maybe that's a different story. Anyways, so we're saying that if the base tree, so we're saying both the branch and the base tree are young trees, and if and it's talking about a situation where the base tree was planted to be used as part of a fence or for lumber, in which case it's not a fruit tree and it's not chayiv and orla, and therefore you would not be going home for this base tree. But now you take a branch and you stick it into this base tree on account of this grafting. Now you would go home for it. Right? Now you take a branch from a tree that is less than 3 years old and you stick it into this base tree. Now, on account of the grafting, you would go home for this grafting, for this tree, or I guess these trees. The Tnan, as we learn in a Mishnah Notea L'Sag V'Lekoris, that if a fellow plants a fruit tree for to be part of a fence or for lumber, Potum Mina Orla, so there's no orla in that case because you're not planting it for fruit. You're planting it for a fence or for wood, for lumber. Umayshna yalda bizkena dibitela. Umayshna yalda b'yalda delo bitela. So fact the Gemara, but 1 second. We had just said that if you have a young branch that you stick into an old tree. So the young branch is betela to the old tree. So why don't we say the same thing here? That when you take this external branch and you stick it into this young tree that was planted, for a fence or for lumber, shouldn't we say that the branch is bottled to the base tree, and therefore it would not be chayiv in orlin? You would not go back from the war. So hasam imimlich Allah la bas mihaderhi hacha imimlich Allah bas mihaderhi deha meikar leferi kaima mididava olu me'elein detnan olu me'elein chayiv beorla. Friends, let's go back and read that slowly. So, Hasam, when it comes to the old tree, and you're sticking a young branch into an old tree, the thing is, the old tree, there's nothing you can change your mind about the old tree. You can't just change your mind and now it becomes a young tree. Once it's old, it's old. But But in this case, where the base tree was planted to be part of a fence or for lumber, you can always change your mind and say, it's going to be for fruits. And even though he hasn't changed his mind, but because he could, there's the potential to change his mind. So that makes all the difference. And that is why when you take a young branch and you stick it into this base tree, you would go home for these trees, because it would be considered a tree that these fruit trees that you haven't been mechal yet. Because at the end of the day, by default, fruit trees are for fruit. Just like if you just have fruit trees that spring up on their own, as we learned in the Mishnah, that if fruit trees just kind of spring up on their own, then they're chayav in an orla. So we see that by default, fruit trees are for fruit, and therefore because the person can always change his mind and say that these trees that he planted for to be part of a fence or for lumber, he can change his mind and decide that they're for fruit, and therefore when you graft them, so meaning if you just have the tree alone, okay, if you planted it for fruit, if you planted it for wood, so then you would not go back for them. But if you graft it, so then you would, on account of the grafting, you would go back. So now, for the Gemara, why do you need such a complicated case where you're grafting it because, you planted the first one for lumber and now you have this other branch you're sticking into it and because you could change your mind? How about this? Reuven and Shimon. Shimon owns the base tree, and the base tree is a young tree, and Shimon's going to go home from the war because he's got these young trees. Now Reuven has a branch, and Reuven sticks it into Shimon's tree. So the only reason why Reuven would be going back is on account of the grafting, right? Shimon can go back because he has these base trees that are young. Reuven doesn't own the base trees, but he owns the branch that is being stuck into the base trees. So while Shimon is going home because he's got young trees, Reuven is going home because he grafted these young trees. So why don't you just say that that's the case? The case of grafting is where Reuven sticks his branch into Shimon's trees. Shimon will go back because of his planted trees, and Reuven will go back because of the grafted tree. So Amr of Papa is also meris. Her Papa says from the fact that we don't give this example, this indicates Kerem shel shnei shutfin, that if you have a vineyard owned by two partners, ein chozon olav me erke amulchama, you would not go back from the war on account of a vineyard owned by partners. But why should that be any different from the case where you have five brothers? One of them died in the war. So now only one of the remaining four brothers is going to be able to do yibum, yet all of them can go back. So if all four of those remaining brothers can go back from the war, so then shouldn't two partners who own a vineyard also be able to go back? So we say, Ha'asum kol chad v'chad karina bei ishto, hacha kol chad v'chad lo karina bei kami. We say it's different. Because by the case of the brothers, until yibum happens, any one of them could potentially do yibum, and therefore, there's, it doesn't say it here, but maybe it makes sense that there's a zika there, right? There's each one could potentially be her husband and she could be his wife, and therefore all of them are able to go back. But over here, people who jointly own a vineyard, no, right? Meaning, any one of those 4 brothers could be married to this woman entirely with, right, 100%. Whereas these partners don't own the vineyard 100%. They, by definition, only own a portion of it, and therefore they would not go back on account of the partnership. Okay, that was the hard part, I think. Where am I now? I lost my place. No, come on. Oh, okay, fine. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omer says, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, what's the example of permissible grafting? What's the example of permissible grafting according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak? B'mavrich ilam b'yerek. Okay, if you graft a branch of a tree with a vegetable. Okay, by Tanahu, and it's the following Tana. The Tana is within the Brisa. Mavrich ilam b'yerek. If you graft a tree with a vegetable, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel matir. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says it's okay. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamda ish Kfar Yaakov. And I guess he says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamda ish Kfar Yaakov. V'chacham osin. Chacham say it's not allowed, but Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says it's permitted. And okay, and that would be an example of grafting that you can go home for, but you wouldn't go. But you're grafting it. But the base tree is a vegetable, and you wouldn't go home for a vegetable, right? Only for fruit trees. But on account of the grafting, that's why you would go home. Okay. Because Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yochanan, when Rav Dimi came, he said the name of Rav Yochanan. Hamani Rav Eliezer ben Yaakovi. So Rav Dimi says the name of Rav Yochanan. What was our original question? Our original question was, our Mishnah says that you go home for Mavrich Umarkiv. The Brisa says that you do not go home for Mavrich Umarkiv. So we had said that, well, if it's mutter, you go home. If it's also, you don't go home. Says Rav Dimi says the name of Rav Yochanan, Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. In the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Wait, what? No, I lost the place. I'm sorry. Rav Dimi says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that the author of the Brisa who says that you don't go home for grafting, it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi. Lo Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. After all, didn't Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say, Hasam Kerim Kimashmo? Didn't Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say that when it says Kerim, it means only a Kerim, nothing else, no 5 fruit trees or anything like that. So Achanami, Noto Kimashmo. So also, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would say that when it says planting, it means planting. It doesn't mean grafting. Notea in Mavrich Umarkiv lo. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion is planting you go home for, grafting you don't go home for. Also, Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, when Rav Dimi came and said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Yalda Kusa mitefach, that if you have a tree that is a very short tree, it's less than a tefach tall, chayeves ba'orla kol shnosea, it's always going to be chayeves in orla forever, because it will always look like it's a brand new tree, because it's so small, and people who see you eating from it will, might draw the wrong conclusions vis-a-vis orla. Even if it happens to be older, but because it's so small, people always think that it's a young tree. Now this is only if you have a few trees like that. But if you have a whole vineyard of small little trees like that, well then people know that, oh yeah, that's just these very small trees, but they're more than 3 years old. That a corpse, all of the 4 amos around the corpse, you cannot say Kriya Shema in that vicinity. That a fellow who degrades poor people, is degrading God, right? Meaning mason, right? Corpses who are unable to do mitzvahs, they're unable to say Kriya Shema. So we shouldn't be saying Kriya Shema near them, and that's within 4 amos. Amar Yitzchak, Amar Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Chorgisa Hagedelu ben Achin Asuri Linosi LaAchin Temischazia Ki Achtayu. That if you have a stepsister, right? If there's a stepsister who grows up among all of the stepbrothers, those stepbrothers, right? But she should not marry one of them because it's people might think that she's marrying her brother. It's not true. No, people would know that they're not actually brother and sisters. That they can get married because they're stepbrother and sisters. So if you have an ani who collects leket, right, these parts of the field that they're allowed to collect, right, things that the farmer forgets about or that fall while they're harvesting, or the corner of the field, But if if a poor person takes it and then makes it into a big pile, so then hukbu l'maiser, he's going to have to separate maiser from that because it doesn't look like a chicha and pei. It looks like his own grain. Amar ula lo amar nela basadin, says ula, that's only if they're piled up in the field. Aval ba'ir kala isleinosa. But if he's got all this stuff that he's gathering together and it's in a city, well then he wouldn't have to separate meiser from it because I guess in the city people would realize that this isn't stuff that he's like growing; it's stuff that he's collecting. So this talks about kilei akarim. Kilei akarim, of course, is that when you have a vineyard that you plant with other species, so it's also. So now there's opinion about which species that applies to. Right, so according to the opinion that it doesn't apply to all species, so if you have these species that are only also not midoraisa but only midorabanon, they would also. But if they're less than a tefach tall, ena mikadeshes is azroim, so then these would not be an issue. If they're these little tiny plants, it would not be right. These little tiny plants that are only also midorabanon, they would not be also if they're little tiny plants. Vanimile shtaim kneged shtaim v'achas yotze zonav. That's only if there's just a few of the plants. Aval kulei karim makdish. But if there's a lot of them, so then it would make kilei karim. Friends, that was Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Sotah. We continued discussing things that you'd go home for, whether you built a new house, whether you built a vineyard. We discussed grafting and things like that. Okay, that was Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Sotah. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.